The preacher's hands shook as he held the worn book, his eyes darting between Malachi Brooks and the woman standing beside him. Everyone in that cramped wooden chapel knew this marriage was a lie, yet no one dared to speak the truth. The bride wore a dress that didn't fit her, borrowed from someone else's life, while Malachi gripped a wedding ring that felt like a shackle around his finger. When the preacher asked if he took this woman as his lawfully wedded wife, Malachi's throat went dry. He had never even learned her real name. 3 days earlier, Malachi had been a desperate man facing the loss of everything he had built. The letter from the bank sat crumpled on his kitchen table, its words burning into his memory like a brand. Foreclosure. 30 days. His grandfather's ranch, the only home he had ever known, would be auctioned to the highest bidder, unless he could produce a sum that might as well have been the moon itself. That's when Sterling Maddox appeared at his door like a shadow given form. The man wore expensive clothes that seemed out of place in this dusty corner of nowhere, his pale hands soft as a woman's. Behind him stood a carriage with curtained windows, and from within came the faint rustle of fabric, as if someone inside was listening to every word. Maddox's proposal had been simple and impossible all at once. Marriage to a woman Malachi had never met, in exchange for enough money to save the ranch and set him up for life. All he had to do was play the role of devoted husband for 1 year. No questions asked. No explanations given. The woman Violet, Maddox had called her, remained hidden in the carriage during their first meeting. Malachi caught only a glimpse of dark hair and pale skin through a gap in the curtains. She seemed to flinch away from the light, as if sunlight itself was her enemy. And now here she stood, at a makeshift altar, her trembling hand in his. She was beautiful in a haunting way, with eyes that held secrets he couldn't begin to imagine. A faint scar ran along her wrist like a white thread. The preacher's voice seemed to come from underwater as he pronounced them husband and wife. Violet's lips barely moved when she spoke her vows, words that meant nothing and everything at the same time. When Malachi leaned in to kiss his new bride, she turned her face away at the last second, so his lips brushed only her cheek. It should have felt like victory. His ranch was saved, his future secured. But as the small congregation applauded their union, Malachi caught something in Violet's eyes that made his blood run cold. She was just as trapped as he was. The ride back to the ranch stretched like a funeral procession. Violet sat pressed against the far corner of the wagon, her wedding dress gathering dust with every bump in the road. She hadn't spoken a single word since leaving the chapel, and Malachi found himself stealing glances at this stranger who now bore his name. When they reached the weathered farmhouse, Violet stepped down without waiting for his help. She moved like someone accustomed to taking care of herself, yet there was fragility beneath it, like a bird with a broken wing still trying to fly. Mrs. Dorothy Crane, the housekeeper who had raised Malachi after his parents died, emerged from the kitchen. Her disapproving frown could cut through steel, but when she looked at Violet, pity softened her eyes. "Well then," Mrs. Crane said, voice carefully neutral, "I suppose you'll be wanting to see your room, Mrs. Brooks." The name hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Brooks. Violet went pale, as if hearing it spoken aloud made the charade too real. "Actually," Malachi interrupted quickly, "I thought she might prefer the guest room until we get better acquainted." Mrs. Crane's eyebrows shot up, but she nodded. "Of course." For the first time, Violet looked at him not with suspicion, but with the faintest flicker of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her first words to him. But the moment shattered with the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders crested the hill, moving fast. Even from a distance, Malachi saw they weren't the kind of men who came calling for social visits. Their guns hung loose, their hats pulled low, their eyes fixed with cold purpose. Violet went recht beside him. "They found me?" she breathed. "Who found you?" Malachi demanded. But she was already backing toward the house, eyes never leaving the riders. "You don't understand. I should never have come here. I should never have put you in danger." The lead rider dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt heavy and deliberate. A badge glinted on his chest, but something about him felt wrong for a lawman. His eyes swept over Malachi, dismissing him. before fixing on Violet like a predator on prey. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his smile thin as a blade, "you've led us quite a chase." Malachi felt the world tilt. Whitmore, not Violet, not Brooks. The woman he had just married was living under a false name. Violet Elena Whitmore pressed closer to his side, trembling. "He's lying," she whispered. "Harrison Blackwood was never a judge, and I didn't kill him." The false sheriff's eyes narrowed. Judge Blackwood was found dead in his study, a letter opener in his heart. Witness saw a woman matching your description fleeing the scene. Elena's fingers dug into Malachi's arm. "I escaped," she breathed, "and he's been hunting me ever since." Before Malachi could respond, another figure appeared over the ridge, a lone rider in a black coat. Even from a distance, there was something about him that made Malachi's blood run cold. The false sheriff stiffened. His men stepped back instinctively. The man dismounted with the grace of someone who had lived a life of violence. His hair was streaked with silver, his eyes pale and hard. And when he looked at Elena, she seemed to shrink into herself. "Hello, daughter," he said. The word hit like a thunderclap. Malachi felt Elena's whole body go rigid. "I'm not your daughter anymore," she spat, her voice cracking with fury. "Not since the day you sold me to Harrison Blackwood like livestock." Cain, her father, studied her with cold calculation. Blackwood's death cost important men a great deal of money. They want repayment or revenge. Malachi's hand dropped to his gun. Mrs. Crane stepped onto the porch with a shotgun. Tension thickened the air like a wire ready to snap. Cain's smile never wavered. "You're a reasonable man, Mr. Brooks. Surely you see harboring my daughter places you in an impossible position." "The only thing I see," Malachi said, voice steady as steel, "is a father trying to drag his daughter back to hell, and I see men trespassing on my land." Cain's eyes gleamed. "Very well, but understand this Elena belongs to me. She always has, and what's mine has a way of finding its way home." He mounted his horse. His parting words cut deeper than a knife. "Oh, and Elena, your sister sends her regards. Sarah's proving to be quite useful in your absence." Elena's cry of anguish split the air. Cain and his men rode off, leaving dust and despair in their wake. And Malachi knew then this wasn't just about saving his ranch anymore. It was about saving a woman who had already lost everything and whose enemies were closing in. The night after Cain's departure was thick with unease. The ranch seemed smaller, its wooden walls too thin to hold back the weight of secrets pressing in from all sides. Malachi stood on the porch long after sunset, watching the hills, expecting riders to return at any moment. Inside, Elena sat at the edge of the guest bed, still in her wedding dress, her hands knotted tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since Cain rode away, as though words themselves were dangerous. Malachi thought about leaving her to her silence, but something about the way she hunched her shoulders like a child bracing for a blow drove him inside. He leaned against the doorway, his hat in his hands, uncertain of what to say. Finally, he spoke. "That man? Cain? He really your father?" Her head jerked up. The firelight caught her face, pale and worn, eyes swollen from crying. "He's the man who raised me. But father?" Her lips twisted. "Fathers protect their daughters. Cain sells his." The words struck Malachi harder than a bullet. He had grown up without a father, but Mrs. Crane had done her best to fill that void with stern love. He could not imagine being raised by someone who looked at you and saw profit instead of blood. Elena's hands trembled. She lifted her sleeve, exposing the scar on her wrist. "That was Cain's idea of teaching me obedience. He said every daughter is an investment, and investments don't run away." Malachi's stomach turned. He crossed the room slowly and sat on the edge of the chair across from her. "You don't owe me answers," he said carefully, "but I need to know what kind of storm I just brought to my doorstep." She met his gaze with something like defiance, though her voice shook. "Blackwood was meant to be my husband. Cain arranged it to settle a debt. But Blackwood wasn't a man. He was a vulture. He treated me like property. I endured it until one night he came to my room drunk. I fought back, The letter opener went deeper than I meant it to. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. I never wanted to kill him. I only wanted to be free. Malachi sat back, his jaw tight. He'd heard of men like Blackwood, men who thought power gave them rights over others. But hearing it spoken aloud, seeing the damage etched into Elena's voice and body, stirred something fierce inside him. "You were defending yourself," he said firmly. "They won't see it that way," she whispered. "Not Kane, not Maddox, not the men who owed Blackwood money. To them, I stole an asset. I destroyed an investment. And now, they'll hunt me until I'm dragged back in chains or buried in the dirt." Before Malachi could respond, a sound broke through the heavy silence, the distant rumble of hooves. He stood instantly, hand on his revolver, while Mrs. Crane appeared in the hallway with her shotgun already loaded. Elena froze where she sat, her eyes wide with terror. The riders came not from the hills but from town, 6 of them moving in tight formation. Their horses were sleek, their saddles polished, their guns strapped in neat holsters. These weren't Kane's rough men. These were professionals. They stopped just beyond the fence. Their leader, a man in a gray coat with the bearing of a soldier, raised his hand. "Mr. Brooks, we come with congratulations from your benefactor, Sterling Maddox. He sends his regards and his gift." 2 riders dismounted and dragged a heavy crate from the back of a wagon. They carried it to the porch, set it down with a thud, and stepped back. Malachi kept his gun drawn as he eyed the box. "What's in it?" The soldier gave a thin smile. "Your wedding present. Open it, and you'll find everything you need to keep your wife safe. Mr. Maddox takes care of those who uphold their bargains." Mrs. Crane shifted her shotgun, muttering, "I don't like this one bit." The riders turned and left without another word, their formation as precise leaving as it was arriving. Within minutes, only the crate remained, sitting like a coffin on the porch. Elena stared at it, her face pale. "Don't," she whispered. "Whatever's inside, it won't be a gift. It'll be a leash." Malachi knelt, prying open the lid with the edge of his knife. The hinges groaned, and the smell of oiled metal filled the air. Inside lay a collection of weapons rifles, ammunition, knives, all neatly arranged. But nestled among them was something worse. A ledger. Thick, bound in leather, its cover stamped with Sterling Maddox's insignia. Malachi lifted it, thumbing through the pages. Names, numbers, transactions. Each line a debt, a deal, a life bought and sold. And scattered through the entries, one name repeated over and over again. Kane Whitmore. Elena gasped. "He keeps records. Of everything. Of us." Malachi closed the book with a snap. "This ain't a gift. It's a message. Maddox wants us to know he owns Kane. And now he thinks he owns you too." Elena shook her head violently. "No, I won't be owned again." But even as she spoke, Malachi saw the truth in her eyes. Maddox's shadow reached farther than Kane's, deeper than Blackwood's. If Kane wanted her back for family, Maddox wanted her for business. And both would burn anyone who stood in their way. That night, sleep did not come. Malachi paced the floor, the weight of the ledger heavy in his mind. Elena sat by the window, staring at the dark hills, whispering her sister's name under her breath. Sarah. When dawn bled across the sky, Tommy Peterson, the nervous telegraph boy, arrived with another message. His hands shook as he handed it over. "Straight from Maddox," he stammered. Malachi unfolded the slip of paper. The words were brief, but they chilled him to the bone. "Your bride has value. Protect her well. Tomorrow at dawn, her kin will come to claim her. Stand aside, and all debts are forgiven. Resist, and you'll lose more than your land. S. Maddox." Elena read over his shoulder, her face draining of color. "Her kin," she whispered. "That means Kane. And everyone he can muster." Mrs. Crane loaded her shotgun with a grim expression. "Then we'd best be ready." Malachi looked out over the land he had fought so hard to keep. His grandfather's ranch now turned into a battlefield. He thought of Kane's men, of Maddox's soldiers, of Elena's haunted eyes. The storm was coming, and there was no running from it. Elena reached for his hand. Her grip was trembling but fierce.
"You don't have to fight for me,"
she whispered.
"I've brought enough ruin to your life already."
Malachi looked at her, at the scar on her wrist, at the exhaustion carved into her face. And for the first time since the wedding, he realized this wasn't about bargains or debts anymore. "No," he said quietly. "This fight ain't just yours. It's ours now." Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the faint sound of distant hoofbeats. The dawn Cain had promised was drawing near. The sky was still dark when Malachi heard the first whistle of the wind over the plain. He had awake all night, his rifle resting across his knees, his boots planted firm on the porch. Inside, Mrs. Crane prepared bandages, her face set with the calm of someone who had seen death before and had no fear of meeting it again. Elena hadn't slept either. She sat on the floor against the wall, her wedding dress now torn at the hem, her hair loose and tangled. But her eyes burned with a strange mix of dread and resolve. She had lived her whole life under Cain's shadow. Today, at dawn, she would face it. Then came the sound, the low thunder of hooves rolling across the hills. Malachi stood, his hand brushing against the revolver at his hip. In the first light of dawn, the riders appeared, dozens of them, fanning out like a dark tide spilling toward the ranch. Their rifles gleamed in the pale light. At their head rode Cain Whitmore, tall in the saddle, his eyes fixed on the house like a hawk circling prey. He raised his hand, and the riders stopped at the fence line. Silence fell, broken only by the restless shifting of horses. Cain's voice carried over the distance, deep and commanding. "Malachi Brooks, you've got something that belongs to me." Malachi stepped down from the porch, rifle in hand, but not raised. "She ain't yours, Cain. She's no man's property." Cain laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Property? No, she's blood, and blood don't run from its kin. You can step aside, boy, and keep your skin, or you can stand and be buried in that dirt you love so much." Elena appeared in the doorway then, her voice sharp and trembling. "I am not your blood, Cain. You sold me to Blackwood like cattle. You beat me when I cried for Sarah. You are nothing to me but a jailer." Cain's face darkened. "You dare speak to me so, girl? After all I've done to raise you?" "You raised me for profit," she shouted back. "And now I'd rather die here than ever go back to you." The men around Cain shifted uneasily. Some looked at each other, their loyalty faltering at her words. But Cain's glare silenced them. He pointed at Malachi. "You've got one chance, cowboy. Hand her over. Maddox won't be pleased if his investment dies in a backwater shootout." Malachi lifted his rifle, the barrel steady despite the fire burning in his chest. "I don't give a damn what Maddox wants. You cross that fence, Cain, you'll pay for every scar you've left on her." The standoff broke in an instant. Cain's hand dropped, and gunfire cracked across the plain. Bullets tore into the ranch walls, splinters flying like shrapnel. Malachi dove for cover, firing back with deadly precision. Two of Cain's riders toppled from their horses before the others could regroup. Mrs. Crane stood in the window, her shotgun booming like thunder, scattering the front line. Elena huddled low, reloading cartridges with shaking hands, passing them to Malachi as fast as she could. The air filled with smoke and screams, the smell of gunpowder choking the morning air. Horses reared, men fell, and still Cain pressed forward, relentless. He was a man who had built his life on control, and he would not leave without reclaiming what he saw as his. Malachi fought like a man possessed, but there were too many. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him back. Blood soaked his shirt, but he gritted his teeth and kept firing. He wasn't just fighting for land anymore, he was fighting for her. Elena saw him stumble and cried out. Without thinking, she grabbed the rifle from his hands and took his place at the porch rail. Her shot rang true, dropping one of Cain's men. She reloaded clumsily, tears streaking her face, but her hand steadying with each pull of the trigger. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was standing. Cain saw her and snarled. He spurred his horse forward, charging through the smoke with pistol drawn. His shot shattered the window where Mrs. Crane had been moments before. "Elena," he bellowed, "you think you can defy me? You'll crawl back or you'll die here. Malachi surged to his feet, pain lancing through his arm, and leveled his revolver at Cain. Time slowed the thunder of hooves, the flash of sunlight on steel, Elena's scream. The gunshots split the morning. Cain reeled in the saddle, his chest blooming red. His horse bucked, and he crashed to the dirt, dust rising around him. For a moment, silence held. Then his men, stunned, began to falter. Without their leader, their rage turned to fear. One by one, they pulled their reins, retreating into the hills until only Cain's broken body lay in the dust. Elena ran to him, not in love, but in finality. She knelt beside the man who had ruled her life with cruelty and watched the light fade from his eyes. He tried to speak, his lips forming her name, but no sound came. She whispered one last truth as his breath stilled. "You never owned me." Malachi staggered to her side, his arm bleeding, his face pale but resolute. Together they stood over Cain's corpse as the sun finally broke across the horizon, bathing the land in gold. The battle was over, but the war with Maddox was not. The ledger still sat inside, its pages heavy with names and debts that would one day come to collect. Elena turned to Malachi, her voice soft but fierce. "They'll come again. Maddox won't let this go." Malachi nodded. "Then let him come. We'll be ready." Mrs. Crane joined them, her shotgun slung across her arm, her face grim but proud. "You're not alone anymore, Malachi. Neither of you are." For the first time, Elena smiled small, broken, but real. She had no ring worth keeping, no past worth saving. But in the blood-soaked dawn, she had something new, a choice, and a man who had chosen her not as property, but as a partner in survival. The loner cowboy and the fugitive bride stood together on the porch of a battered ranch, the morning wind carrying away the smoke of battle. The land around them was scarred, but alive, like them. Some stories aren't about heroes. They're about broken people who refuse to break again. Malachi Brooks never asked to be a savior, and Elena never believed she could be free yet at dawn. They chose each other, against the world, against blood, against the weight of power itself. And that's why their story matters. Because in every corner of history, there are voices trying to be silenced, debts trying to be collected, and people standing against it no matter the cost. If their fight gripped you, if you believe survival is a victory worth telling, share this story so others know the strength it takes to stand when every shadow wants you on your knees.